May 16th, 1998. Cottonwood in Northern California is a small, cozy town where everyone knows each other. But today, a hired killer found himself on its streets. He's on his first assignment. From a reliable source, he knows his target is 28-year-old Carole Garton, a well-trained special agent whose life as an ordinary office worker is just a cover. Opening the envelope with her photograph, he severed all escape routes. Today, he'll either kill or be killed. Everyone who knew Carole described her as the nicest person they had ever met. She had a soft voice and a gentle smile. Additionally, she was remarkably talented. She wrote song lyrics and performed them herself. Her passion for music introduced her to her future husband, Todd Garton. He dreamed of becoming a rock star, founded his own band, and performed in the independent music scene in Portland. However, as often happens, he had to give up his music career, and the two moved to California where Todd joined the Navy. Unfortunately, Todd's military career was also disrupted due to an injury during basic training. Consequently, he worked for his father's company installing fences. Carole worked at an insurance company, essentially supporting the family. In September 1997, after 6 years of marriage, Carole shared the news she had been eagerly waiting for with her husband. They were expecting a baby. On May 16, 1998, at 1850, Todd Garton returned home from an arms exhibition. He arrived with his friend Dale Gordon, who was temporarily staying with him. Todd knew his wife should have been at home, but her Jeep was not there. The door was unlocked. He found Carole in the bedroom, on the bed, covered in blood. She was lying unconscious with several gunshot wounds to the head and abdomen. While Dale called emergency services, Todd attempted to assist his wife. However, the arriving paramedics pronounced her dead. The officers searched the Garton family home. The attack obviously happened suddenly because Carole didn't have a chance to fight for her life. The assailant shot her 5 times, 3 shots to the head, 1 in the side and 1 in the leg, from a .44 caliber weapon, as the pathologist later determined. Everything was left in its place. There were no signs of forced entry into the house or any casings found. This led investigators to 2 conclusions. First, the assailant was someone Carole knew and allowed into the house. Second, the killer had taken every possible measure to leave no trace behind. Investigators spoke with Todd and Dale, both still shaken by what had occurred. They explained that the 3 of them had gone to an exhibition along with another mutual friend, Norman Daniels. However, Carole became tired quickly, and Norman offered to drive her home. They left in her white Jeep, while Todd and Dale stayed until closing time. Naturally, detectives wanted to speak with Norman, but he was nowhere to be found, at home or at work. The situation was unclear. Norman could be a suspect or a victim of a second murder. In any case, he was the last person to see Carole alive, and it was crucial to find him as soon as possible. 28-year-old Norman worked with Todd and Dale at the fence installation company. The men quickly bonded as all 3 were former military personnel. Norman juggled 2 jobs as he was a single father taking care of his young son. He was a very pleasant and quiet guy. His friends trusted him completely and couldn't believe he was capable of harming Carole. While the police waited for Norman at his home and workplace, patrol officers discovered Carole's Jeep abandoned on a road outside the county limits. There were no traces of any crime in the vehicle, leaving the investigators puzzled. However, their confusion was short-lived. A taxi pulled up to Norman's house and he emerged from it. He was immediately taken to the station for questioning. Officers informed Norman about what happened to Carole and asked about the events of the previous day. He recounted that he and Carole left the show early to finish watching a rented movie. They started watching the movie together, and when Carole said she was tired and going to lie down, he finished the movie from the beginning and planned to return it. Initially, he didn't want to wake her up, but eventually did, and informed her he'd take her Jeep before leaving. The story seemed smooth, but detectives questioned why, in that case, he abandoned the car and took a taxi home. They decided there was enough reason to detain him and obtain a warrant to search his house. In Norman's house, they quickly found blood-stained clothing, a .44 caliber Rossi Magnum revolver, and casings. When informed about these discoveries, his behavior changed. His hands trembled, his face went pale, and he began to recount what happened. When Carole lay down to rest, Norman entered the bedroom, pulled out the weapon, and immediately started shooting, giving himself no time to think. The first shot didn't kill Carole. She opened her eyes and began to writhe. Then Norman repositioned himself for a better aim and finished the job. He then sat in her Jeep, drove home, changed clothes, wiped down the revolver, and abandoned the car. Norman's account perfectly matched the evidence, creating the impression that the case was solved. But why would he cold-bloodedly murder his girlfriend, who was 8 months pregnant? Norman claimed he was envious of Todd and Carole. However, this explanation didn't align with what investigators knew about him, his character, and his relationship with the couple. For Carole's friends and family, Norman's arrest was a shock. They couldn't believe his guilt for a minute. Nevertheless, he was arrested, and his phone conversations were recorded. Through this, the police eavesdropped on a particularly intriguing conversation between Norman and Todd. Norman informed Todd that the police found the weapon and knew everything. In response, Todd promised to reach out to certain influential people who could help them. All of this seemed suspicious to the investigators. They pressed Norman, and he revealed what prompted him to commit the murder, but it was completely different from what the police expected to hear. He confessed that he carried out a contract for a secret organization named The Company, consisting of ex-CIA operatives and other covert government organizations, providing hired killing services. The company had affiliations with the Irish Republican Army, or IRA. The IRA was an armed group that had resisted British occupation in Northern Ireland for decades, aiming to unify with Southern Ireland. Norman explained that he received a contract to kill Carole and became the one assigned to the task, taking orders directly from an IRA commanding officer, Colonel Shawn. The investigators could hardly believe what they were hearing. A secret organization comprising former operatives entrusted a task to someone like Norman? And why would an ordinary office worker become a target in this conspiracy involving the IRA? Norman explained that she was also a member of the company and needed to be eliminated because of her previous objectives, also as a member of the company. The order was delivered to Norman on March 28th, 2 months before the murder. Inside a wax-sealed envelope were photographs of Carole, notably one where she was pictured with Todd and another man. The men's faces were crossed out, while hers was circled. It also contained her home and work addresses, phone numbers, and the period assigned for the task, from March 28th to May 20th. Additionally, it detailed Carole Garton's previous training as a special agent. Detectives were at a loss. Did such an organization really exist, or was this a figment of Norman's imagination? To understand, they inquired about how he became a member of the company. It turned out Todd introduced him to the organization's activities. Without delving into specifics, he hinted at completed tasks and mentioned that working for the company could be quite lucrative. Norman added that Dale was also privy to this secret. Shocked that Dale was also involved in the activities of the mysterious company, the investigators invited him to the station. He didn't hesitate to confirm Norman's story immediately. Dale learned about the company approximately a year before the murder. There was a contract to eliminate a man from Oregon named Dean Noyce, and Todd invited 2 friends to assist him. The contract was placed on Dean because he was embezzling money at work. Other hired killers were also after him, so it was necessary to hurry if they wanted to get to him first. It was up to Dale to pull the trigger according to Todd's plan. Although Dale was initially drawn by the money promised for this job, he had a change of heart. Unfortunately, Todd didn't accept no as an answer. He explained to the new recruits that they would be provided with a handler. Her name is Lynn, and she lives in Oregon. So the 3 men headed to Oregon. Todd personally met with the handler, who handed him the keys to Dean Noyce's house and garage. The plan was to wait for the victim in the garage, where he would leave his car before work, but the man didn't show up there. Later, Todd put on a homemade silencer on his weapon, and all 3 cautiously approached the victim's house. Todd took the key given by the handler, inserted it into the lock, pushed, and nothing happened. The lock didn't yield. Todd was furious, but the mission had to be called off. He removed the silencer and threw it over the brick wall of Dean Noyce's neighbor's house, after which the men fled, considering the mission a failure. Todd never mentioned the company to Dale again, and Dale decided that all ties with it were over. Norman, on the other hand, wanted to be part of the company. He needed money for himself and his son. That's why Todd suggested he directly contact Colonel Shawn, one of the leading members of the organization from whom the orders come. Norman reached out to the colonel via email, asking for another assignment. The colonel agreed and handed Norman an envelope sealed with wax through Todd. Todd immediately warned his friend, if he opened the envelope, there would be no turning back. Moreover, there was a high probability that he would have to kill someone he knew. This was a test by the company to ensure his readiness for the task. Norman agreed and opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph of Carole. Todd was deeply upset but couldn't take any action. He explained to Norman that his wife's appearance was deceptive. In reality, she was deadly dangerous, and committing murders was not new to her. Despite Carole not being who she pretended to be, Norman considered her a friend and didn't want to harm her and her child. Then Todd reminded him that in such a scenario, as a warning to other company agents, the company would deal with him and his little son. Norman lived for his son, did everything in his interest, and this threat shattered him. He realized he had no choice. Following the company's instructions, he burned the envelope and all its contents, but decided to keep the wax seal. Lynn was again appointed as Norman's handler. She assisted with information and planning. Norman was in prison while the police tried to sort out the case. Judging by the phone conversation, Todd was involved in this story much deeper than it seemed, but additional evidence was necessary before levying suspicions against him to press charges. Therefore, on May 23rd, a week after the crime, detectives attended Carole's farewell. Next to Todd, they saw a woman who never left his side. Disregarding Carole's friends and family, she made it clear to everyone that she came for Todd, not to bid farewell to Carole. The detectives were surprised when they found out that her name was Lynn Noyes. Could she be the same Lynn who acted as the curator of the murders? Detectives put two and two together, and the story of the failed murder began to unravel. Lynn Noyes was the wife of Dean Noyes, a target of the notorious company. It turned out that Lynn had known Todd for many years, even before his marriage to Carole. She had been a fervent fan of his when he performed in a rock band. They stayed in touch even after Todd's marriage, and now the old flame reignited with new force. Meanwhile, in search of evidence of the company's existence, officers searched the yard of Dean Noyes' neighbors and found a silencer. That was precisely where, according to Dale's words, they had tossed it. So this part of the story was confirmed. It seemed the men's story was truthful and Lynn Noyes was involved in the conspiracy. Detectives wondered if she could be behind the company. The woman, of course, denied everything, so the detectives obtained a warrant to seize the computers of Lynn, Todd, and Norman. On all three devices, they found evidence of the conspiracy. Lynn Noyes indeed instructed Norman, pretending to be the curator of the company. She and Todd exchanged romantic messages confirming their relationship. But the most shocking evidence was that the IP address of Colonel Sean led to Todd Garton. It was Todd behind all the crimes. But what stopped him from simply divorcing his wife? Armed with this new information, investigators again interrogated Lynn. This time she didn't resist and confessed to everything. When Carole learned, after 6 years of marriage, that they would soon have a new addition to the family, her joy knew no bounds. But her husband actually didn't want to be a father. He enjoyed being the center of attention and didn't want to care for anyone but himself. So he remembered the woman who was always willing to do anything for him. Todd promised Lynn that they could be together if they secured themselves financially. Both Carole and Dean were insured for a large sum. Hence, the lovers decided to get rid of their legal spouses, get the money, and live together. Doing all of this before the birth of the child. Initially, the plan was to get rid of Dean. The plan was to intercept him in the garage at work, but at the last minute, Lynn changed her mind and persuaded her husband to take another car that didn't fit in the garage, thus saving his life. The second attempt to kill the man also failed, and as Carole was soon to give birth, the accomplices turned their attention to her. After Todd's arrest, he didn't confess to anything, but an undeniable clue was found in his house. The envelope sent to Norman was sealed with a red wax stamp depicting a goat. The exact same seal with traces of red wax was found in Todd's house. Todd Garton's trial began in 2001. He insisted on his innocence and tried to convince the jury that everyone else was guilty except for him. This time, nobody bought into his lies. He was found guilty and sentenced to the maximum punishment. He is still awaiting the execution of his sentence. Norman was sentenced to 50 years in prison. Lynn admitted her guilt, receiving a sentence ranging from 25 years to life. Dale also confessed to conspiracy to murder Dean. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. After serving 8 years and 7 months, he was released, getting a second chance at a normal life. Dale admits regret for wanting to kill Dean and not preventing Carole's murder. He allowed Todd to manipulate him, appealing to their shared past in the Navy. But the ultimate manipulation was the death of Carole and her unborn child. Her husband convinced Norman to kill Carole to save his son, though in reality Todd's real target was his own child. They're not often found in real life, but Todd Garton was an evil genius. He thought he'd be a rock star, then a war hero. Instead, he built fences with his father. So he started creating a world where he was the main character. To make this world real, he needed to involve others, selecting friends among those he could manipulate. He sold them a fantasy, assuring them that they were capable of things only read about in adventure novels. Todd Garton spent his entire life crafting stories, but the story of his own life is not one to admire.